Good evening. Thank you to everyone for braving the rain. It keeps raining on us out here in Southern California. It's weird. It's getting to be like Portland or something. It's such a thrill to be able to talk to Dessa tonight about her book, My Own Devices. I'm going to be asking a lot of questions about the book itself, and at the end, we'll turn it over to you, the audience, to ask some of your own questions, anything that I don't cover. Dessa, first I want to ask you about the writing side, and I'll get to the rapper side, but what or when did you know you were a writer? What made you want to be a writer?
You know, I knew that I loved language when I was a really little kid, in that, at least as my mom tells it, my first stated definitive aspiration was declared in her office chair, at work. She couldn't find a sitter or somebody was sick, and I said, I want to talk. And she was like, I know, honey. And I said, no, I want to talk about back and forth, where I talk and then you talk and then I talk, but it's always about the same thing. And she goes, babe, that's called a conversation. And I said, okay, I want to have one. And I knew from jump that I really liked words. So actually, I had wanted to be a writer before I thought I might have a shot at being a professional musician, in part because my mom had a really killer voice, and I was like, I wouldn't win the voice if it was staged only with contestants at my address. So.
Well, I love the description you give of yourself as a child, that you were pretty precocious, that you were always wanting to be the one that would sit there and have adult conversation and eat the garlic dip that was too spicy for you as an 8-year-old or whatever. Do you still feel like you're that high-strung kid inside?
Yeah, I mean, I want to say no, I'm very cool, but the kind of kid that I was is the kind of kid I admit that irritates me a little now. You know what I mean? It was too eager. I mean, I did have some adult interests, but I very much wanted the gold star, I wanted the praise, I wanted to impress then, and I admit that I want to impress now, but I'm also aware of the fact that can be that has to be mitigated. The desire to be liked and to impress, I don't think is one that I can root out and disregard because I've already tried it. I just have to figure out how to put that aside in light of more important objectives. So I always have that clamoring, I want to be liked, but you know what? I want to be right, and I want to be my fullest self more than I want you to like me, is something to
Has that been an evolution in your life, figuring out how to let go of the worst parts of that need to be liked, that I think we all have, and maybe particularly women have?
I would say I'm probably still working on it. I mean,
Yeah.
even now, in conversation, particularly when you meet somebody new, you know, and if they express, I don't know, a love for a certain book or movie that you happen to not like, you might temper the degree to which you admit to not liking that, right? Whereas on the phone with your mom, it was garbage. And you're like, oh, yeah, season 2 was okay, in an effort to sort of find some common ground to be liked, in those first moments of an acquaintanceship.
Rapper. I noticed that very distinctly all throughout this book, you call yourself a rapper as opposed to a musician or a singer, artist, anything more general maybe. Yeah. What's important to you about identifying specifically as a rapper?
I think in part that was where my teeth were cut, was in hip hop. I deliberately tried to avoid singing on most of my songs, and that I was apprehensive about being relegated to kind of a secondary support role. I didn't want to be a dancer that was part of the team that made the rap show look cool. I wanted to be the primary thing, and I wanted to, rap is a genre that really prizes wordplay. Yeah, I mean, the writerliness of the lyric is really how a rap song is very often evaluated, at least in the kind of rap that I was writing, which isn't always true in other genres. When you're listening to a really good pop song, I mean, sometimes the hook is E, and it's fine.
Right.
That's catchy. But I wanted to make sure that I was making my way by my pen.
Yeah.
And then it was only later that I started singing more and learning how to play just a little bit of piano and producing as well.
What made you want to move away a little bit from straight rapping?
I think it was in the beginning, I was a part of a community that, to our discredit, was really interested in we were purists,
Yeah.
you know, like, you know what I am? I'm a backpack rapper because I rap and I wear a backpack to bed. Like, that's what I do. I wear backpacks and I rap and I listen to rap. And pop was kind of a dirty word. Like, you know, we weren't crossing genres a lot then, which I think is very often true whenever you have a new genre. You know, people are really mindful of like the parameters of that genre. What counts as hip hop, right? And it may be the same was true of klezmer when that was, you know, in its infancy. And now, as a grown-up, I know that a lot of those same purists were like, I'm a backpack rapper, that's all I do, and then secretly listening to Billy Idol or whoever they really liked on the fly, in the same way that I was like, you know, I still like Joan Baez. So I think part of it is just becoming, is rap coming of age, and part of it is me and my cohort coming of age and saying, you know what's more interesting than a genre designation is the question, not is this song pop or rap, but is this song any good?
Yeah.
Like, that's a better question to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, always. The lyrical content of your songs, do you feel like that's where your ideas start first and foremost, is that you would write the lyrics and rap music around it, or do you come up with beats or musical ideas first? How does it work for you?
Yeah, I think for me it's like it's kind of like a paleontologist in that there will be little shards of language that I'll collect throughout the day, either just like in my hip pocket on my iPhone or in, you know, maybe in a moleskin notebook or something, but little phrases. So this isn't a full verse, this is an image. And then later when I'm listening to a beat, I'll kind of scroll through dozens of pages of just little tiny scraps of language and see which ones might be collected. So it's sort of like dumping the puzzle pieces on the dining room table and going, okay, now I need corners, you know, and kind of putting all those aside to see what picture you might be making.
That's really beautiful. I was struck by certain lines in your essays that did feel like something that you might have thought of at some point and found the right nest to put the beautiful sentiment in.
Are you busting me right now?
No, I think it's great. I mean, I think that's what writers should do, is like find those, like have those little gems and find the right kind of house for the gem. And one of them was, I've seen footage of vocal cords in action. They look like cartilage orchids.
That was one for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that is just such a beautiful way of describing something, you know, obviously deep in our throats and anatomical, and that we usually don't assign much beauty to, but that was a really tremendous line. So,
Thanks.
Yeah, do you have moments like that where you have a notebook that you're just collecting those kinds of things in?
Yeah, I do. I would say by now I probably have 100 or 200 pages of like one-liners, you know?
Wow.
But some of them will never get used, or if you go through them again, you realize they're not that fresh. Or you've got to now go write a story that somehow incorporates a cartilage orchid, which is kind of a...
Right, like do you sit down and you're like, all right, I got to write an essay that's going to bring in these cartilage orchids somehow?
Yeah, occasionally. I would say I write fiction too, and for me, there's probably... And I'm less comfortable in that form, you know, it's a secondary form for me for sure. So I definitely have kind of just a wheelbarrow full of scenes that I'm hoping to be able to eventually place.
Yeah. Well, tell me about the genesis of some of these essays. Maybe we should start with a particular one. I'm thinking of A Ringing in the Ears, which is the essay that really centers around your father and him building a Woodstock glider from scratch.
Yeah.
So tell me how you put that one together.
So I think like a lot of people, and maybe a lot of artists in particular, I had a pretty tumultuous relationship with my father when I was young. I admired the hell out of him. He's super bright. He's super mad all the time, but when he wasn't mad, it was magnetic, you know? And so I have no idea if this is true or not. And if there are psych majors in the house, I can just already feel like the eyes rolling and spraining and
Raise your
staying
hand.
there. Yeah. But I've heard that like for a lot of performers who do end up sort of like approbation hungry, you know, you want people to clap at you, that a lot of them had like complicated relationships with angry dads because there was that sort of only intermittent approbation, right? It only worked sometimes. So you got really good at reading people's vibe.
Interesting.
Which
yeah.
then is a skill that you can translate to stage, right? I can tell that person's bored. That person's texted twice. That guy's not going to go home with that girl. You know, whatever the read is that you're taking on the room. And you end up also for this kind of insatiable appetite for praise. Because you had a little less of it than you wanted when you were a kid, you know. So with my dad, I wanted to honor the fact that he is like one of the most important people in my adult life. I love the hell out of him.
That was clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. But I also wanted to, you know, investigate that kind of tricky, troubled time. And I think it was like part of the reason that I loved him so much was the same reason that he was unavailable a bit at times as a dad. Like, he's this dude driven by passion. I mean, he just almost, I don't know, he's an eclectic cat. And when I was a little kid, he decided to build this airplane. It's made entirely out of wood, and he really flew it. There's no engine in it. And he decided to make it without electric tools. So he's essentially, like, he spent 7.5 years in our garage, like, building a bird, you know, that he was then going to fly. And when he wheeled it out of the garage, the neighbors were like, what the hell is going on at the Wander House, you know? That's an unusual thing to do. And the reason that I was so excited for him to be my dad is the same reason that he didn't really have time sometimes or have the patience maybe for real little kids.
Yeah, I love the line that you say at one point. Well, it's a quote from him that he says, flying the Woodstock is like flying a violin.
And he just talks like that. Like he does sound like an orator of a very different generation. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, he sounds like very much like a World War II speech writer. That's just how the words come out of his mouth, you know? And that can get a little long at lunch sometimes, but it's convenient for if you're writing a book about him. It's just endless, so.
Well, I think something in the book that's really interesting and explains something about your own journey, perhaps, is that both of your parents have chosen these really unorthodox career paths and life paths. Not only has your dad gravitated towards, you know, building his own flyer or glider, and then offering pilot lessons from there, your mom, who was this like Bronx-born Puerto Rican gal, like turns around and starts raising cattle at a certain point.
And
Who saw that coming?
Yeah, not me. I was so not supportive. Like, what a jerk. You know, it's like I become a rapper and she can handle that. But it just didn't seem well planned. And it was like, as she was retiring, she's also like a very slight bodily. She's very slight. She looks kind of like Grace Kelly. So just a really fine frame. And it was just,
wow.
Oh, they're going to step on you.
Yeah.
They're going to step on you.
I mean, I'd be worried about it too.
She grew up in the tenements. Like, you have no idea what to do with a cow. And the way that it all came about was like she'd been thinking about it. But I always thought, we think about a lot of things, right? And then she saw this herd on the side of the road, pulled over. She's still in her corporate wear and makes an offer for those cows, like, to an 80-year-old farmer. And I was like, I say it in the book, but I was like, this is like one step above magic beans to me. Like, what are you doing? And yeah, flash forward, 7 years or something like that now, and she's a rancher and kicks ass. And and I used to be a vegetarian, and now I eat her beef because it's delicious and it's raised really conscientiously.
I mean, yeah, how can you refuse? I mean,
you can't.
She's raising it by hand.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, bottle feeding.
Grass-fed beef.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what we spend $10 on at Whole Foods easily.
Yep.
Because your parents were so unorthodox, I wondered how they were when you came to them and said, hey, I'm a rapper. What did they say?
You know, it wasn't an immediate win. My mom was like, I thought she was going to go law school. I think that was her first thing. And I was like, I don't think we've ever discussed that. I think that was a life plan. I've never indicated an interest in that. And then my dad, he had a more serious concern. He was just like, you know, he is of an artistic bent. Money is not super important money is as unimportant to my dad as it can be for someone who is also an independent adult. He just doesn't give a flying about it. And so there was no hesitation on what if you don't make enough money? That was fine for him. But he was like, you know, rappers speak so poorly of women. I don't understand why you want to do this. I don't understand what in your background would make you gravitate towards that. And I was like, you know what? That's a totally legitimate concern. But it might be the case, and I know it was the case, that the kind of rap that he would be familiar with, not having sought any out, is the kind that's going to end up like on a mainstream TV channel or even on the news, you know? And so I was like, the impression that you have of rap is not a representative impression of what that world is like. So I made him a mixtape, and we sat down and listened to some lyrics together and stuff.
Oh, amazing. What did you put on the mixtape?
I remember some of it, but not all of it. I remember there was some, like, some of the artists in the underground world that I was a part. So it was like Sage Francis, who's an East Coast guy who's really political. Okay, rad. There was also, and this was complicated, but there was also the Outkast song,
Oh, yeah.
I'm Sorry, Miss
Which
Jackson.
one? Oh, yeah.
Which means that I had to talk through that second verse. Right? Because, yeah. So it wasn't that he didn't have a point.
Right.
There is, there is a huge vein of misogyny and at least disrespect, and also in that era more than today of homophobia. But that was a descriptive factor and not a defining factor of the genre, and there were plenty of people who were operating with a different moral compass. So part of it was explaining that to him. And then also I think as I went on, he'd been a classical guitarist. So as I got a little bit more musical, I think he just happened to like the music more, which made it easier.
Yeah. There was more of an entry point for him.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, a section in your book that I thought was really interesting and has to do a bit with what you just mentioned of like what people's ideas of rap are. As you talk about being at a dinner party or any dinner party, and you know when you introduce yourself as a rapper, you get this certain reaction. I'll read a little bit from this. A corporate type will usually cross his arms in a half-assed b-boy pose and ask, like, rapper, rapper? If he happens to be wearing a cap, he will turn it backwards at this point. When I confirm, yes, a rapper, rapper, the guy will often recruit a friend to share in his astonishment. And you also talk about the sort of class and race expectations that come into play. I'm socially polished and well-educated, traits he doesn't expect from rappers, and maybe by extension traits he wouldn't expect from young black men in streetwear. So what I thought was really interesting about this part is that in a way you're getting this really multi-layered reaction, which one is like, what is this woman who looks white to me doing saying that she's a rapper? And then another layer of it is what I think of rappers as being are uneducated black kids. So how do you kind of navigate that reaction?
And I admit I'm sensitive to it, like, because that's not something that you can call someone on. When he turns his hat backwards and he does a dumb, like, I can't say, Ted, you're a racist.
Right.
Because
Though it's tempting.
but I can think it. No, because first of all, that's an oversimplification. But there is an undercurrent that the reason it's funny to you to do that posture is because you imagine that there is such an enormous cultural divide between the social role that you occupy and the role that a person who would move and dress and dance like that occupies. That here, over our second appetizer course and a glass of white wine or wherever we are, like this is just as far afield in our intellectualism as far as we could be from the universe of rap music. Which is true maybe only in its trappings. Like, there is an intellectualism that runs through rap music. We just don't call it intellectualism because the gatekeepers of the academy communicate differently and in different words. But it is absolutely a form of dissent, of cultural criticism. It is an idea-driven form, and it is a language-driven form that celebrates flourish and virtuosic skill. Does the song Boots with the Fur do that? No, obviously not. But on the whole, like, you are an Olympian verbally in rap music in a way that is absolutely like a mental intellectual exercise. And so when a dude does that, like, delicately, I will try to be like, yo, the joke that you're making doesn't actually work because the premise doesn't support the punchline. It is true that I don't look like a lot of rappers, and it's totally fair to call that out in the same way that if I were to meet, like, I don't know, a basketball player, who was pro, who was like a 5'2" blonde lady, I'd be like, this is exceptionally surprising to me. It's very, very surprising. You're on the lake, really, or whatever, like, so there should be room for that moment of surprise, absolutely. I don't fit the bill, that's true. But there shouldn't be room for the joke that makes a very silly, like, stupid caricature of rap, because that is very often shorthand for, like, men of color. And that's, like, not that funny.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to ask you about some other statements that you made on the same page, which is basically, having to do with being, and your mother is Puerto Rican, so you're white and Puerto Rican, and you're a practicing hip hop artist, and that has traditionally been linked with people of color. And how do you mitigate being the racial makeup that you are, and does that conflict with like taking any of that art form away from people of color? And you talk about how that's been, incredibly hard question to answer and just figure out as time goes on. Do you have any sort of new ideas about that, or just how do you grapple with it today?
Yeah, I mean, I would say when you use the word hard, I think it's exactly the same word that I did. But I wouldn't say like, oh, my position is very difficult. I have a very difficult position. No, my position is very easy. Figuring out the appropriate response has been a challenge. And that I think initially when I first started, and admittedly, like I think, I didn't know the word white presenting then. For me, that's a recently learned word. But when I have like long dark hair and I have big hoop earrings and it's the summertime, I'm very often more identified as Latin than when I have like bottle blonde short hair, And so at the beginning of my career, when I had like a really long braid and just looked more like classically Latin, or people would do that initially when people would ask me about being a white rapper, I would just be like, yo, you need to check your facts. That's a really unfortunate research on that you've done. Now I admit that question isn't about me anymore. Like, I'm gonna make my own way. I'm paying rent off music. That's freaking rad. That's a question about culture. So when I answer that question, in addition to hoping that my career does well and that I can sell my new CD or my new book, right, whatever that is I might be promoting because I'm on the radio, that there are people who are more affected by the way that question is answered, who have more skin in this game and have had more skin in this game. I look white enough in almost every circumstance to benefit from white privilege, so I should answer the question about how that affects me before saying, also, you need to do your research. So I do maneuver through the world with white privilege. Let's talk about it. Also, I'm Puerto Rican, and I don't want to say that I'm not. That's part of my life in whatever way it has been, And it's something that's important to me, and I don't wanna write off because you think I look white. Like, go make a pastele. Like, I don't have any interest in disacknowledging that because of the way that I physiologically look. Latin cats are really mixed. I got, like every other Caribbean family, I got cousins who are hella dark with green eyes and kinky blonde hair. I mean, it's just a Yahtzee throw, like genetically. And I'm not gonna disavow that because I happen to be light.
Yeah. Well, early on, you include a glossary in the book, and I think that's important to include because, there are so many terms, all kinds of terminology that comes into play with being any kind of touring musician, but I think particularly with hip-hop. What was a term that you threw in there that you were happy to finally shed some light on, or dismantle? Because there's a couple of terms that you're like, no. Like femc, you're like, no thanks.
I don't think we need that one.
No, toss it out.
Or feminem are just words we don't need. I admit that my initial attraction to the glossary was only half content-based. I liked the idea. Does anybody visit the website McSweeney's? Do you know that site ever? Okay, it's like a humorist site, but they take a lot of unconventional forms and make them funny. So it's instead of being like, here's a short story that has a lot of laughs in it, they'll be like, here's an instruction manual to assemble a new IKEA shelf. And it'll have all the diagrams and stuff, but that's somehow rendered into a comedic piece that's really rad. I liked the idea of flipping a glossary on its head. So it
Yeah.
starts out as a glossary that like explains terms that you'll need in the book, but then it becomes a more personal piece about love and loss. So I admit that I was kind of romanced by the idea of flipping the form on that one, as much as any term.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think you just struck on a little bit the love angle in this book. The underpinning of this book is an off and on relationship that you had with who you call X in this book, who is a member of Doomtree. I want to ask you, what did you do in terms of figuring out how much you wanted to share about that relationship in this book? Because you do mention that you asked his permission, or I don't know if that's the right phrase, but you talked to him about the fact that you were going to write about him. So I'm wondering how the two of you navigated how much you were going to share, what might be off limits, so forth and so on.
Yeah. So I was in writing the book, I knew that I wanted some essays to touch on that because I didn't know how to write a series of true stories that didn't include that. Because it really was like not only all-consuming, but it had been the secret of my life. You know, I'd been on stage and on tour with this person for more than a decade. And it's never appropriate at a rap show, like for that first song, like to come out in tears. Which means that you buy waterproof mascara, because I was crying before most shows, you know. It was just really hard. And also felt so lucky to be alive and on stage with this like rad, aggressive crew. There's no other crew who I would have ever chosen to be a part of, even given that it was so difficult. But it was very sad. And I didn't want to ruin the vibe in the van with the other rappers, you know, because that's ruining other people's like whole life. I mean, you tour together. You live like this, you know, you are tied. Yeah, it's a sack race. Mm-hmm. So if you are crying in front of those people, you are really affecting their whole lives. So it was really important to hide however painful it was for a lot of years. So I didn't know how to write about music without mentioning that. And then as I went on, I think the editor with whom I worked pushed more to have more and more of it in. And I was like, dude, I don't want this to be like some heartbreak vibe, though. I don't want that to be the story of my life. It's like, I'm a heartbroken girl. You know?
Yeah.
My PayPal is, I hated that idea, but I took her suggestion to include more of it, and then by the time it was done, wrote dude. I was like, hey man.
Guess what?
Wrote a book. And I sent it to him, and he said, crying in my car, and I said, are there things that hurt too much for me to publish? Or are there things that are factually wrong? And he said, you remember so much. I think it's beautiful. And I think I've been lucky that he gave me the green light. And throughout our entire careers, though, I think because he's also a real artist, right? Both of us have decided that we would rather suffer a sting in listening to the other's music than not have that song released. Right? So there's one song about killing me on one of his albums, and I heard it, and I was like, this is a beautiful song that I would never like to hear again. You should definitely put this out, and I would never like to hear your performance. You know, it's just because it's a good song. It should be out there. It's rad. Well done. That hurts.
Yeah.
But I'm lucky in that I think both of us had like a higher priority than avoiding pain.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that you do that I think is so distinctly you is to figure out the heartache that persists from that relationship being on and off. You pursue some really unusual courses of action to figure it all out. One chapter, you're writing to Geico, basically. You know Geico, everyone. Where you're basically asking them to insure you. Why don't you explain it? Explain the letter that you wrote to them.
Can I just read it?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you remember what page? I think it's one of my tags in there.
Oh, I thought you said I think it's one. I thought you were going to hit me with a page number. Like it's 112. I was like, wow.
That'd be super impressive.
Wow. Okay. So I knew that, you know, I'd been. Well, I'll just do it. Dear agent, my name is Dessa. I'm a Geico auto insurance customer looking to expand my coverage. Your rates are fair, the perforated ID card's easy to tear, and I like the gecko.
It's true.
Although I do. I really still do.
The gecko, yeah,
I
it's been
know.
around for a
He
while.
still works on me. I don't know why. And I've been doing a little bit of research on insurance. I read that Ben Turpin insured his crossed eyes because they were crucial to his career. He'd been a film star, a comedian that made a lot of money based on the kind of silly look that he had. And he had paid an insurance company to insure them so that if they ever went straight, he'd have a payout. I'm a songwriter who makes her living writing torch songs. I'm able to do that well because I'm naturally melancholic, and also because of unresolved feelings for a former romantic partner. If I were to find myself in a state of unchecked, protracted joy, I'd either have to re-career or take a lengthy sabbatical to acquire the skill set necessary for a new mode of self-expression. Can you please tell me whether or not you'd be able to insure heartache as a professional asset? And if so, how much a monthly premium might be? Thank you, Dessa. So, yeah, we started an exchange. Yeah.
Did the customer service agent tell you? I mean, I was going to say were they recording your call, but
They
I guess
were.
you wrote that as a letter.
And I recorded it too. The thing that was weird to me is that it was like she had 100 calls like that every day. She was like, we don't yet, but do you want rental? And I was like, really? Really?
She didn't even bat an eye. She's like,
Nothing.
you're the third person to ask
She
today.
goes like, she literally said, but check back because we're expanding our commercial coverage. You're insane.
Amazing. I mean, what is it you think about your emotional process that makes you turn to these like scientific methods or other kind of like really logic-based inquiries to figure it out?
I think it was honestly just the length. Like if you're heartbroken for 3 months, you do the thing. You have ice cream, You watch sad movies and you
Yeah,
go out
you go out
with
with your
your
friends.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You do the thing. But it was like the 14th year of this, so I'd had a lot of ice cream, and also I was reluctant to lean. To be honest, too much on friends. Like I'm having the same conversation with friends, which A is kind of taxing on our friendship, and B is humiliating. It's humiliating. Like everyone else is getting over this, right? At a reasonable rate. And people with like marriages and children, are figuring out how to move on. So I think in part, it almost like to put a little distance between me and that feeling, right? Like to take it out and look at it through a lens and say, well, this is ridiculous. Can I walk around the thing? Can I manipulate it? What is this conceptually? I know how it feels. It feels bad. Okay, well, I've covered that. But like philosophically, I wonder what's happening here. I wonder if there's a genetic predisposition to hold. I wonder if that's something I could inherit from my parents. I wonder if this is something that I could make a different relationship with, given the fact that it doesn't seem to be leaving when I've evicted it.
Yeah, I think this might be a good time to talk about Call Off Your Ghosts, because to me that's like the ultimate thing that you did to try to figure out what this heartache is all about, and sort of answering the classic question, like, is it all in my head? Where is it? And we do have some slides. I think we can show a slide or two, and then we'll turn it over to you guys to ask some questions. But basically, you decided to get your brain scanned to see how your brain would react when you saw a picture of who was called Dude A in this essay, because he was contrasted with Dude B, who is someone you knew, but you weren't in love with.
Right.
Yeah.
So initially, I myself had seen a TED Talk about this researcher who said that in her work, she'd found that particular parts of the brain were associated with romantic response. So if we were talking backstage, you're married, so if we were to put you in an fMRI machine, that's one of those like really big magnet joints. You know how on TV there's the one where they get wheeled in? This one? Yeah. It's that.
They scare me. When you said you're not claustrophobic, I was like, I would be like setting off that
tripping.
alarm.
Yeah. It wasn't
There's an alarm you can set
comfortable.
off with like a red ball that you can squeeze and say, get me out of here.
Panic ball. Yeah.
Panic ball.
But if we were to wheel you into an fMRI machine and then show you pictures of your man, parts of your brain would really reliably light up that are different than even if we showed you parts of your, if we, McConaughey or whoever you happen to dig. So it's different than thinking.
How did you know?
It's universal. That it's not thinking that guy's hot, and it's not thinking that I have a relationship with that guy or history. It's not familiarity. Like the parts of your brain that light up in romantic love are distinct even from the parts of your brain that light up in platonic love or maternal or fraternal love. And that was exciting to me. And I thought, wow, if there's like a reliable cortical region, that's responsible for this feeling, maybe I could just get it out if I could find it. So I worked with a team of neuroscientists at the University of Minnesota to recreate that scientific protocol in a single blind study. So here's a couple images. Let's see. That's what the show looked like, right? When you're pretending you're not sad. Okay. This next one it's really an athletic scenario. So you do burn a bunch of calories at a Doomtree show. And then slide. I always wanted to do that. Slide. Yeah, that was me. And those are three of the regions of the brain that are associated consistently with romantic love. You have that kind of red arc there, which is the anterior cingulate, which lives kind of right here. You have that kind of golden set of ram's horns, which is the caudate. I had mine 3D printed and bronzed. And you have the ventral tegmental section. In short, this is the structure that through other published research seemed to reliably light up in love. So when I laid down in my fMRI machine, looked at pictures of my man, and then a dude who I thought was hot and I kind of knew but was not my man and who I was not in love with, so he was the control, we found that my brain did reliably light up in those patterns that had been anticipated by other research. Side. And so I ended up leaving with a few images of like my brain in love. And it was in some ways very silly, because when I first got this email, I like opened it at a coffee shop and just really, I don't know, I just felt like I've been kicked in the chest, a really dramatic reaction. Subjectively, of course you know you're in love and that it hurts. Like that's been the story of your adult life. But somehow to have like an objective piece of information to be able to show other people, like I think the line that I thought then and think now is like, of course it's all in my head, but now I know exactly where. And it was really gratifying to be able to have like something demonstrable, to say like, this is it. This is the strength of the cortical signal that's been driving me nuts. Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is the most industrious, ambitious response to heartache that I can think of. Most people just keep it lazy, just go the ice cream route. But was part of you like, okay, I'm going to do this because it would be pretty bananas amazing to write about this in an essay?
Absolutely. I think it's also like, okay, well, it's like the show Chopped or something. It's like, what's in the fridge? I have to make dinner. Well, I have to make a record, right? Like, what's in the fridge? Pain? Okay. Let's figure out how to make something out of it, because it's certainly not valuable as a subjective experience in its own right. So, like, what is something lovely, or at least entertaining, that could be rendered with this ingredient that is plentiful in all the cabinets? Yeah.
Okay, I want to end on a different note, even though I'm dying to ask you, how are things with X now? You can just say 2 words. How are things with X now? Answer in like 2-3 words.
2-3 words. Medium.
Okay, I'll take it. All right.
Friendly. Yeah.
Hamilton mixtape. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Congratulations on congratulations. But also, one thing I really like about this collection of essays is how frank you are about the artistic life, which is that, there are struggles, there are ups and downs, that, at one point you write about how you thought in your 30s, by then you'd be playing in a different set of clubs and you'd be laughing about the old days of all packing in a van and that kind of thing. So tell me, and I love the part where you just spend all day counting the likes and the retweets and all that of the song coming out. But tell me sort of now how it's been since Congratulations has come out and what kind of new goals you might be setting for yourself.
Yeah, I would say so. I got to record a song on the Hamilton mixtape. And I think when that opportunity first came through, I was like, I'm made. Like,
Yeah.
such a dink. I just, yeah. I had an outsized response to that, and then it has helped. But as I mentioned in the book, like it wasn't nearly as profitable as I thought it would be. Although it has since, like, no complaints. I was really fairly compensated. But of course, my hope was like, oh, now that song's out, all these people are going to discover all my other music, right? And I'm going to be touring on a bus instead of a van, which is a really big difference in the life of a musician because it means you get to sleep at night instead of drive. So that didn't happen, but it has helped in the way that I think all incremental wins have helped. That, like, well, when we were backstage, there's a little TV back there where you can see. There's a video camera there, so we could see what was happening on stage. And I was looking at you while Karina introduced you because she said, Margaret has written for Elle and the New York Times, and she was listing all these cool places, and I was like, does that still feel freaking awesome? And I was watching your face to see if it was just like, yeah, or if it was like, yes, I did. And I think that's old news to you now. I mean, because you've earned it and continue to earn it. But yeah, that being able to put like that thing in the byline, there's like 2 or 3 things now in the resume that at least establish that you're credible in a way that I didn't have before. So when I got my first piece published in the New York Times, that's a game change, you know? Does it mean that you're rich and famous? No, it certainly does not. It doesn't mean you're gonna sell a bunch of your copies of your new book. Let me tell you, it does not. But
Real talk here.
real talk.
Yeah.
But it does mean, like, I'm a writer, and I'm legit, you know? So now please evaluate my work on its own merit. You can hate it or you can love it or find some other middle ground. And similarly, I think with the Hamilton mixtape thing, it was like, okay, that's legit. That record was at #1. I had a tiny little contribution, right, to make to it. But for people scanning a resume, it's like, oh yeah, okay, what's this? It at least buys you 30 seconds of attention to have an audition, right? And that's what a lot of the musical career is saying, hey, I could never make you like this or not. You will like it and you will know, or you will not like it and know in about 90 seconds. You're just fighting for that 90. Could you press play though for 90? That's the whole ask. Yeah.
Well, and Hamilton is like, you know, like you say, it's a bump on the resume, but it's an extraordinary bump because, I mean, it's like in the water at this point, you know?
I've
like
never seen anything like that culturally in my life.
Yeah, it's insane. All right, I want to hear from you guys. What questions do you have for Dessa? Can we hear from you?
Hi, I have a 2-part question. Number 1, what sort of influence has the Twin Cities had on your career, and what advice do you have as someone who has lived in St. Paul their whole life and like is deciding whether or not to live there after I'm done living here?
You're not living there your whole life because you're here now. You're studying here and you're trying to decide if you're going to go back. I feel you. I would say that I always struggle a little bit to answer questions about like, how is growing up where you did affected your life? Because none of us get to grow up in 2 places to A and B it, you know. So I'm never quite sure. But I will say that the independent scene musically in Minneapolis punches above its weight class. Like it's way better than I thought it was. When I left, I thought every city must have that, and I found out that that was not true. It is an unusual place in that way. Maybe because there are no majors, so we all figure we all just have to build the systems that we need to be able to put out our music. So in Minneapolis, you can, and St. Paul, you can put out a mixed bill in a way that by that I mean you can have different genres. So you could have metal, and punk, and hip hop on the same stage, which you find out quickly in other cities. You dug beer cans, for real, full beer cans, because people don't like that. And those populations don't like each other. But in Minneapolis, it works. That's rad. I don't know. I would say go out and see other cities before you decide. The world's a big place. Twin Cities has a lot of magic in it, but the world is big. Yeah, don't decide too soon.
Can we get just a quick like Twin Cities roundup? Raise your hand if you have a connection. Okay, very good.
Okay, so since I'm an 11-year-old, what advice would you give your 11-year-old self?
Ooh.
Advice for 11-year-old self.
I'm looking at you to try to figure out how similar we were at 11. I know a little bit about you because I talked to your mom at concerts. You, to be honest, seem pretty self-possessed. By that I mean you seem comfortable. Even when I was 11, if I were holding that microphone, I know how heavy these are, it would look like this.
Yeah, she seems pretty chill.
You seem very
she's got it
chill to
under
me.
control.
So I might give my 11-year-old self different advice. But I would say that I was preoccupied with, like I said before, being liked. I wish that I had been a little bit better at like doing things that I thought were fun, but I wasn't good at. I still struggle with that. Like I want to be good at something to do it. But it's like, let's say you're not good at soccer, right? Well, who cares? If it's fun to run around and play soccer, just be medium at soccer and have fun. I wish I'd done more of that instead of feeling like I always had to impress.
That's excellent advice. That's so true.
Thank you.
Hi, I had a question mainly about the letter that you wrote to the Geico customer service.
Do you work for Geico?
Please work
No.
I want that insurance policy
Right, we
so
need a
bad.
Geico employee in the house.
Yeah, no, I was wondering about sort of because you're kind of talking about, can I have insurance to make sure that I always feel this pain so I have something to write about? And I found in my experience that a lot of artists and people who make art and communities that make art, there's almost kind of a romanticization of mental illness and
Yep.
pain. And I find that to be really harmful and damaging. So I was just wondering if you could share a little bit more about your experiences with that and the truths and sort of the falsehoods.
Yeah, I would say that I think as a teenager, I bought into the Plath thing. Hook, line, and sinker, right? Like you have to suffer. I don't think that that's true, but I'll say it with the caveat that I have found it to be true. I don't think that I'm representative, however, whereas I used to just imagine everyone was like that. I've just met a bunch of artists, and a lot of artists who would go, okay, well, yeah, even if my 20s were really hard, I practice a lot of self-care on the road, and I make sure to see my therapist every week, and I started meditating. Laserbeak, one of the dudes in Doomtree, is like a huge advocate for meditation. I have noticed, though, so I also want to feel like even though my story I don't think is representative, it's still mine, and it's still true as I've lived it and understood it, which is in the moments when things are going really rad, I just haven't felt compelled to pick up a pen. I just live them. It's when there's conflict, and that doesn't mean I'm suicidal, right? That's not what that means. But I mean when there's conflict, when there's an unresolved question, those are the times that I would want to go in and investigate. And so to be honest, using the Geico thing, I was hoping, although maybe I wasn't successful by your lights, to investigate that in a more playful way, right? Which is just like, hey, we've seen this. But what is it? How come? How come I write when I'm sad? And what would it be like to write really happy songs? Could I do that? Let's say if my life flipped and I wasn't so naturally blue. I wonder what those songs would be like. At the same time, like the more that I learn about happiness studies, I might push against you just a little bit to say, I think that there is some value in happiness researchers when they say, you know what the most effective way to be happy is? To have been born with a predilection for happiness. That's the most effective way. That there is a dispositional predilection. That doesn't mean if you're scared and you're really in pain, not to seek help. Go seek help. As somebody who's benefited from help, gosh, go seek it. But I'm not going to beat up on myself anymore that I'm not happy all the time. I'm okay with being a little blue. I think it's a fine way to be, and I don't want to apologize for that anymore either. Whereas I felt like it used to be a failing, like, oh, I'm living life wrong if I'm regularly visited by bouts of melancholy. I kind of think I'm just built that way, and I found a way to make some cool music out of it. So, as long as they're not so blue that your quality of life is really suffering, I think that's a legitimate way to be a person too.
Yeah, that's a great question. I also think that in the book there's almost like a default mode you talk about. You talk about heartache being a sort of default mode that you write from, which isn't necessarily how you live all the time. It's like
That's
a
true,
point
too.
that you can access for your art, but it's not necessarily coloring your every single day and
I think that's a good distinction to make, yeah, that it's not like, oh, it's not if you want to be a writer, you better go get sad. Yeah. Absolutely not. I just think for me, that's the parts of my life that have felt most fruitful are those probably when I'm doing some investigation, when I have a question or an unresolved issue, which very often definitely are those moments of some discomfort, But yeah, I on the whole, I would agree with you that I think we do have, we are too ready to Van Gogh the whole world.
Hi. There's been a lot of discussion about your work with the Hamilton mixtape and how you got that work, but I'm curious how you ended up working on the RBG documentary. I haven't heard anything about that.
Yeah, that, to be honest, was like an email. And there was a filmmaker who said, hey, my name is Julie Cohen. I'm in New York. I'm working on this documentary about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Would it be okay if I brought a few friends to your show to check out the live show? I said, yeah, sure, put you on the list. Met her there, thought she was super rad. I don't know, just easy, effortless. You know, one of those people who's just effervescent, really easy to like, and it didn't look like a performance of effervescence. She was just cool. And then, I don't know what she would say about the performance of that doc, but I had no idea that was going to be as successful as it was, you know? So, yeah, I think she was an indie filmmaker who was easy to root for. And also, maybe this is like more business than people want to know, but for understandable reasons, filmmakers very often don't offer compensation packages to musicians. And that's such a fancy way of saying you don't really get paid a lot of times for movies because people are hoping that you'll want to do it for the exposure. And she offered like, hey, here's some money to put your song in my movie. And I was like,
I love that.
Thanks,
because,
dude.
the exposure argument gets real old.
it does, and also it's a reminder to me too to do the same, because there are times for sure I'm like, hey, listen, there's no budget for this, but this is such a cool project. You want to be involved? So like, I get it, and I've done that pitch too. But I admit that it was kind of refreshing to be like, here's the work that you've done, and does this budget make sense and does it line up? And I was like, wow, thanks, Julie. Yeah, thanks, Julie. And it's been, of course, a lot of fun to watch her sweep. To watch her win, man, it's cool. Yeah.
RBG.
So, having spent those 14 years navigating heartbreak, and both in your music and maybe in the structure of your life, and having that be maybe if not gone, at least less there now.
Yeah.
What is your current relationship to that negative space?
You know, sometimes I feel like it's even tough to. I've never broken like a major bone. And I've never I'm not a parent. But I think it's really tough for us to conjure from our memories in full color big pain. You know? But when I remember the behavior that I would do, I mean, even just like, just lying on the ground just because it hurt. That is like such a foreign memory now, like that I can only remember like, wow, that woman must have been in considerable pain to like hold that position on the carpet at her dad's house at Thanksgiving. But I can't actually remember how painful that was in a full color kind of way. And there's probably an amnesia built into our design, right? To make sure that we continue to lead full lives that would potentially render us vulnerable to a second heartbreak, right? So yeah, I would say my relationship is there's kind of a foggy recollection probably in some ways. Yeah.
Just like childbirth.
I was going to say, I mean, I didn't want to, because I'm not a parent, I didn't want to go there, but I was very much hoping that you would make that connection, so thank you.
It's good that you don't remember.
Yeah, because else you wouldn't go for round two.
Right, exactly.
Right?
Round two would never happen.
Hello, I was just wondering if you might be willing to do a tiny miniature performance of one of your favorite.
A miniature performance of what?
Miniature performance of one of your favorite pieces that you've created.
It just sounds, listen, so everything in me is like, I want to be liked. But nothing is sexy about like sitting in a chair and rap. Like it doesn't sound cool. It doesn't look
You can't
cool.
like kind of get down.
Or
and,
how about
you know.
some of your favorite phrases?
What are some of my favorite? Okay, let's see. I'm working on a new song over a beat that I'm making with Laserbeak, my Doomtree cohort, and a dude named Andy Thompson, who's a killer producer in Minneapolis. And I recorded. I don't have my phone on me. I recorded a pair of subway drummers in New York, and then we cut up. I have my iPhone, and then we cut it up to make the beat. So I was writing that today. Let me think if I can think of an 8-bar. Just hot fire here at this theater.
Do you need a coach track?
No. Chekhov says, you got a gun, you got to use it. Guess they're reading Chekhov downtown in their cruisers. Bang. Catch the case, we all lose. Come for the news, stay for cartoons. History's a flywheel, likes to stay the course, takes it through violence to get land rights, divorce. Or a woman's world ends right there on her doorstep, married in her mother's veil and buried in her corset. Woo!
All right, we have time for one more question.
Okay.
Oh God, the pressure. Dead center here. Let's go with that.
Okay, so I actually have two, if you don't mind. The first one is, now that your book
Wait a
is
minute.
released, do you feel like a weight has been lifted? And then the second part is, you mentioned a lot of books here. What are some of your favorite books that have changed your perspective on life?
Could you say the last thing? Oh, what are some of the books that have changed my perspective on life? Is that what you said? Yeah. Now that the book is out, I feel probably a medley of feelings that are not unique to me, but are shared by all writers. One is, secretly in your vain little heart, you hope you're going to sell a billion copies, and your life is going to change. That did not happen, but I'm proud of it, and the feedback that I have gotten feels real. Like, it feels legit from people who they're just more people who are struggling with protracted heartache than I ever thought there were. And because I happen to have written a book about it, it's super weird. I cannot express how weird it is that so many people are doing that. But there's never a point when you meet someone, to be like, hi, I'm Becky, and I've been in love with my ex-husband for 42 years. Like, there's no point that you should ever say that to anyone, ever. And so, but because I wrote a book, like, every once in a while someone will be like, hello, my name is Becky, and I've been, and like grizzled old stagehands will be like, God damn it, I've loved her for 30 years. I'm like, are you serious? You hate me. Like, it's just not that rare. And that has recalibrated my understanding of this. It's just very private. And so there's no reason for fellow strugglers to know each other, because we're not meeting over weak coffee in Lutheran basements to talk about it, Okay, and then books that have changed my life. Like any reader, probably, it's as much the time that it hits you. Right, okay.
Yeah.
So if I read it today, I don't know what my response would be. But when I first read A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius by Dave Eggers, I was like, on every level. First of all, that he was in pain, but that wasn't the only thing. Like, he found a way to be funny about it. He also did a lot of that, like, form bending that I talked about earlier, like with the IKEA thing. He has this cool, like, the floor plan of the house that he lived in at the time. This is not a spoiler because it's early, but his parents are very sick, so he's gonna have a hard run in his 20s. And he does this really cool, like, schema of his living room where he just shows the vector exactly through the furniture and down the hall where a man running in socks could get the longest slide,
Critical knowledge.
As if anybody's going to go visit his childhood home to recreate this slide. That was a killer one for me. And then David Foster Wallace was probably like a lot of undergraduate kind of era readers. I just had no idea that people came that smart to the planet, and that they were allowed to be that smart and expect other people to accompany them on their intellectual trips and still sell books. So the fact that he was like, there's calculus in this work of fiction, I was like, wow. And I want to know enough what happens that I'm going to brush off the calc and figure out what the heck is going on. Like, I just had no idea that you could be that smart and also so vitally creative. I thought it was rad. David Rakoff, David Sedaris, because it's just funny bar stories, which means that all the people who blew my mind are named David.
I was going to say, trio
It's all
Davids.
Davids. I'm big on Davids.
Thank you.
All right, I suppose we're out of time, right?
Can I just also say thanks for braving the
Dessa,
rain? Yeah.
Thank you for making my job easy, and thanks to all of you for coming out tonight.
A big hand for Dessa and Margaret Loeffler.